Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to EIG's 82nd webinar, a fireside chat discussion with our guest experts from the industry, Cora Swart, Director of 4Excellence Solutions, and Monica Ockham, Management Consultant at 4X Solutions. We're looking forward to an interactive discussion, so please do respond in the chat and also into the survey questions. And we hope that your family are healthy and safe. We appreciate you taking the time to join us in this interactive fireside chat. This is the second webinar in a series of webinars with 4Excellence on building robust risk controls for your bow ties, identifying managing critical controls. So we look forward to your interaction in the webinar. We believe that best-in-class people, process, data, and technology can solve fulfillment problems, improve cash flow, enhance customer experience, and increase revenue. 4Excellence Solutions will demonstrate that risk can be turned into opportunities to provide you a competitive advantage over your competitors. And moreover, 4Excellence Bowtie methodology provides a guidance on how to identify, assess, mitigate, and manage risks. It's an online tool, and it incorporates technology to make it easier for your organization to manage these risks. My name is Jim DeVries, President of Enhance International Group. EIG is an exchange of passionate experts to guide your transformation to provide self-generating and self-funding results. We have over 50 consultants, consulting companies, and SaaS thought leaders, providers that are vetted to be best in class. EIG serves as a master integrator to provide you that access to the best and brightest companies. We act, some folks call us a Swiss Army knife. Our team is dedicated to empowering your organization's workforce by leveraging EIG partners' tenured thought leadership expertise. Our goal is to meet and exceed your expectations and to provide predictable, sustainable, and repeatable self-funding programs, providing you that competitive advantage. Our past and current webinars are available for free and can be found on the EIG website, consultingeig.com. With us again is Cora Swart from 4Excellence. Just have him provide a brief introduction. His company was established in 2011 and has well over 10 years in this space. Cora, a few words?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jim, for the introduction and also the opportunity. I think it's important today that we just want to share some of our learnings with everybody that has joined us. I think a lot of this is practical knowledge of what we've gained through engagement with various clients. And I think that's important. I think one of that comments said the knowledge is important, that you get the risk management knowledge, but it's also then how do you practically go and apply this in an organization. So, I mean, 4X is really an improvement, a team of industrial engineers focusing a lot on business improvement. And what we usually do is we create the integrated picture for people. And that's really what risk management is also then about, is actually visualizing those things that you want to manage. Yeah, and that's where we fit in. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this discussion today.
Thanks. And Monica, Management Consultant at 4X, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Yes, I'm a management consultant, but actually an industrial engineer, and I work with Cora at 4Excellence Solutions. And yeah, I'm really passionate about this and having the ability to visualize and understand your risks. So I'm really excited to show it again today and zoom into that criticality of your controls and really understand it.
Excellent. And just to give a little background on myself, over the last 30 years, I've worked in roles in resiliency, from startups to Fortune 500 companies. Back in the 1980s and 90s, the GE, we didn't know what, we didn't call it risk management, but we were doing these types of practices like like you see on the screen here. So I'm very excited about the formalization of this and the program that Cor and Monica will be sharing with us. With that, Cor, a brief overview of your company.
Yes, Jim, as I said, we really focus a lot on improvement. So usually we will start with business excellence framework. So creating really a framework within you can do your business. And out of that work we've done over time, we got more involved into risk management. We did a lot of work on operational risk management in various industries, specifically in mining and petrochemical businesses. But the principles you can apply anywhere. And then a lot of the team has done work on business improvement initiatives. So your typical operational excellence environment. And of course, as soon as you start doing all of those things, you move into this change and communication space. So whatever initiatives you develop, you need to do proper change management and embedding and implementation of that. And then part of that is then also embedding learning or knowledge into your organization. So it's really this integrated approach. So even today, if we talk about BOWTIE, it's not a tool that you will use in isolation. It will always be part of a bigger management system or management approach that you will use. So that's really typical. What our company will do is we will always come in and first understand the problem before we just jump into one solution. And yeah, that's what we've been doing for about the last 12 years.
Thanks, Cor. Excellent. I call it the racetrack. I love it. Fantastic. So sometimes when you have a racetrack, you might need a bicycle. So that kind of leads into my slide. We call it the bicycle slide, which describes EIG, which is quite interesting. You know, in describing supply chain management, risk management, we need to start by recognizing that supply chain is an ecosystem. And you've heard the saying that we're only as strong as our weakest link. And you might take that a step further with this bicycle analogy. The dry pedal represents your strategy, where you do your vision, supply chain management vision, let's say, or risk management vision. And into your intrinsic, to say, what is that intrinsic value does it provide you to have a strong, robust supply chain? And what does that operating structure look like? So that's your strategy, so that you can execute. And you execute by seeing what you're doing. And if you can't see where you're going, obviously you might not stay on the racetrack. So you start with visibility, and then operational risk management and enterprise risk management. In summary, there's really three considerations in managing your supply chain. Are you linked? Are you making linked decisions between strategic, tactical, and operation horizons? If not, the company will be unbalanced and become derailed. Linking strategy through execution will build your cadence. The better your cadence, the more profitable you will be, and your ability to scale will grow. And then a solid strategy should result in many execution cycles, resulting so that the momentum and cadence can be built. So what's the cadence of your company? We often say, and we will help you build that cadence even stronger. And we love the quote by Albert Einstein: life is like a bicycle. To keep your balance, you need to keep moving. So with that, I'm going to go back to the survey and see if there's any responses. We do appreciate if you can join the poll EV. This is the first of 3 polls. With that, we're going to go right into, this is the second webinar in our series. Our next webinar will be on March 2nd, and we'll show the live version of the risk management bow ties that For Excellence has. With that, we'll get to the agenda. The first is how to manage risk with the BOWTIE methodology. What are critical controls, and how to proactively manage critical controls. And then there's a case study, examples of critical control failures. And then we'll get into the value prop. With that, I'll turn it over to Monica.
Okay, so let's get started with the risk management process. So this is a little model that we use when we do risk management at a company. And it starts with identifying the risks, and you will use something like a prevalence map to do that. The second step would be understand. So that would be when you go and you understand the risks that you identified in number one. You would go and take the top risks and understand them. You will not go and try and unpack and understand every risk in your company. Okay, the next step is then to manage those risks that you understand. So you would have controls in place, and you would need to manage those. Thereafter, it's assure, so you can check if your controls are effective. And then lastly, step number 5 would be to improve the controls, if not. So yeah, that's basically the steps that we use. The BOWTIE focus on the understand part. It's a tool that digitalize the understand part, and you can visualize your controls with that. Okay, so let's understand the BOWTIE again. So what is a BOWTIE? A BOWTIE is a risk analysis methodology that you can use to better understand your unwanted event. It's called a BOWTIE because it looks like a little bow tie. So in the middle, you will have your unwanted event, the event that you don't want to have happening in your business. On the left-hand side, you'll have your threats. Your preventive controls would be in between your threats and your unwanted event. And then on the right-hand side, you will have consequences of your unwanted event and corrective controls that will reduce the impact. So if we understand that preventive controls reduces the probability of your unwanted event happening, but your corrective control reduces the impact. And in your controls, you can identify your critical controls. So the controls that you know, if they fail, they will have the largest impact on the probability or impact on your unwanted event. So you don't want those to fail. So you can identify them and focus then on the effectiveness of those controls. Okay, so next up, we go to how do we respond to these controls?
Yeah, so I think what's important, I mean, you will not just jump in and go and do BOWTIEs on hundreds of risk events. So the first step is actually to decide on your risk response. So the people that's joining us that knows risk management well will know one of the simple techniques we have is to do the 4 T's. And the 4 T's, as you see, it relates to either you terminate, transfer, treat, or tolerate. So usually this has a lot to do with your company's risk appetite. So, I mean, how do you think about risk and what risk are you willing to take? So if we would apply this now to a simple driving your car example, some risk, I mean, you will just accept that risk, and that's this bottom right corner, tolerate. So it means, I mean, I've looked at the risk, I've really assessed it. So what Monica did in the process said you identify, and then you can understand to assess your risk. So if I've assessed it and I say it's acceptable, the risk level, then I say we'll just tolerate. So say I'll drive my car. But sometimes I look at something and say, okay, but that risk isn't acceptable. So I'm not willing to go ahead with either a project or initiative or something. And then I say, okay, if I don't want to take the risk, let's terminate that risk. That's now the top left T. So for instance, let's say I don't want to drive the car. So instead of go shopping myself, I will just do online shopping. So I've actually not taken that risk and I've terminated that. The other one that companies usually do is they say, okay, if I'm not willing to take the risk myself, I'm actually willing to transfer the risk to somebody else. So for instance, instead of driving myself, I will actually take an Uber, or usually what the company will do is you will take out insurance. So then a third party is actually taking that risk on your behalf. And then one way we are most interested in is really the treat portion. So treat is actually when you decide, okay, but I'm accepting this risk, but I actually want to either mitigate things that's happening, or I want to prevent these risks, and now I put controls in place. And that's really where the BOWTIE methodology comes in. And actually most of risk management is in this space of treating the risk. And when I start treating the risk, I will start looking at different aspects of the different risk components, and then also the controls that I'll be using. So what you will see is if you start looking at controls, then I must start asking, okay, what type of controls do I need to put in place? So typical, on a very basic level, you'll have things like acts. So act is something that you'll do. So if you think, for instance, about the example of driving a car, act will be I'm driving the car, and I can do something like advanced driving skills. So that's linked to an act. An object is typically a control that you will use that have no human intervention linked to that. So for instance, in your car, something like an airbag will operate if you're in a collision without the driver necessarily doing anything. And that will also start linking then to engineering controls that you can put in place. And then a system is typically this combination between an act and an object. So when you start understanding controls a bit better, these are the things that you need to look at. It's very important that you understand that your risk is really determined by the controls and the effectiveness. So often I think we think of risk a bit in a vacuum, but I mean, the level of risk will really look at the probability of that event and then also the magnitude of its impact. But those things you can only change if you start changing the controls that you put in place. And what that hierarchy of controls now show you is some controls will work better than others. So when you start designing your risk system, you must actually go through that hierarchy and ask yourself all these questions. So can I eliminate that risk? Can I substitute the risk? So for instance, sometimes you've got products that's dangerous to use, and then perhaps you must substitute it. Or as I already said, you can put engineering controls in place, and then admin controls, now you come down to the procedures. So that's the paper you use. And then PPE is personal protective equipment. So that's just one of the frameworks you can use when you start designing your controls.
Yeah, and I found, to your point, most controls in most companies at best get to maybe the yellow. And don't consider the substitution or elimination.
Yes, that's
and it's harder to do, obviously, but that's where you get the real controls.
Yeah, and I think it's also, it becomes more expensive. So a lot of the controls that you usually put in place, I mean, if you start here, say, with the admin, that's really, as I said, people related. But as soon as you do the engineering or substitution or elimination, then you must either start changing your business process, or you must spend a lot of capital or money to really get to that level of control effectiveness. But I think, Jim, it depends on the type of business you are in and also the nature of your business. And as I said in the beginning, then the risk appetite. So what risk are you willing to accept? And that's usually then the conversation that we will also have, because I think from an organizational perspective, some of these controls you must actually decide, say, on a group-wide level. So where you standardize, and then as you go down, then that will become, say, more division specific or operation specific in your business. I see. Yeah, there's a very good question. How you to get people to move up that effectiveness? What we've done usually when you have a BOWTIE session with people and you start mapping the controls, and people can actually start seeing that, I mean, those controls are not very effective. So let's say, for instance, you have a risk event, and now you see all your controls are admin controls or PPE, say in operational safety space. Then you then people can actually start seeing, okay, but I mean, I've got all these ineffective controls. I actually need to put an engineering control in place. But I think when Monica shows the Swiss cheese model, that will actually become evident there.
Great. Excellent. So we'll move on. Give Monica the reins. Monica.
Okay, so let's move on to what are critical controls. So critical control is the control that would significantly increase the risk despite the existence of other controls. So that's the one control you do not want to have failing. So if we look at the Swiss cheese model, each of those slices of cheese, we can say that is a piece that or control that prevents the unwanted event from happening. So usually the model says that the holes in your cheese will not align and therefore preventing the unwanted event from happening. But sometimes those walls do align and unwanted events or disasters does happen. And it happens when a series or a multiple or a number of controls in your sequence actually failed and or were not effective enough. And therefore the unwanted event then happens. So so we don't want those to align as far as possible, and therefore we try and understand and make sure our critical controls are effective. So and this is what this picture actually explains to us. There are a number of unknown risks, there are known risks, but we need the umbrella, we need a wall to actually protect us from those risks. And one example is the business continuity plan, for example, that stipulates how you would respond to an unknown risk that does occur, and that would help us in that way. So yeah, and then you can understand the impact of not having these controls in place. We have a few examples of those in the next slides.
So thanks, Monica. BCP is near to my heart. I've implemented in a number of companies, and we'll just go through a few of these slides on how most companies start their journey in risk management is BCP. At first, in this first slide of series of 3 slides, it protects the production and reduces loss of downtime, so loss due to downtime. And from Forbes last year, unplanned downtime cost in the order of $50 billion a year. And so if you think about what are all the reasons why you lose production and you lose, you have a loss of downtime, what do you want to do? Do you want to protect production, or you want to just deal with those losses and downtime and track them every morning during your shift meeting? But what are you doing to really protect production? Next is on this journey is, how do you look at the operational risk? Do you look at it as less operational risk incidents, or do you look at it as increased operational risk incidents? How do you look at it? And it's a mindset. And again, those operational risk incidents can cost firms up to 6 points in your net income, which of course affects your ability to create cash, and that's not really what you want to be doing. So people don't realize how much, I don't think companies realize how much operational risk actually costs. Back in the 90s at GE, we had a ton of projects when we launched Lean Six Sigma, actually on operational risk management, and we called it risk avoidance. And we increased our profitability considerably by removing as many risks as we could in our operations. The third level is, do you want to increase your competitive edge or deal with no business growth? So a reactionary look at it. And 80% of C-suites and executives polled by Deloitte said that operational risk has impacted shareholder value. So obviously, net income is going to affect shareholder value over the long term. So these are just a way to look at risk management to help you try to sell it within your company. And with that, Core is going to add some additional thoughts. Sorry.
Yes, I think what's important, if you listen out to the conversation to date, is the one thing is you must be able to identify, say, these controls, but then you must also be able to timelessly respond. So one of the key things why we do the business continuity planning and all those things and scenario planning is that you actually, when these risk events occur, you quickly respond. And I think what this Gartner study just shows, it's the graph here on the left-hand side, is the quicker you are able to respond to a risk event, then the results will always be better. And also, I mean, and it's on all different factors. So it will be, for instance, like the budget, you will be closer to budget or within budget, your stakeholder expectations will be met. And the longer you take to respond, actually, the worse your initiative performance will be. And actually, to help you in the BOWTIE methodology, we usually, for us to just simplify to people, we will just talk about the preventive and corrective controls. But usually, you will also have something that they've more used in the financial industry called detective controls. So that's something that actually tells me if something goes wrong. So in my system, I then built in these controls to say, okay, but there's a problem. I'm starting picking up errors. So typical, I mean, what you will see is companies that's more mature, they will start focusing a lot more on leading indicators in their different divisions. And then those leading indicators actually then tells me on two levels. The one is always on your process level. So I've actually put the right process in place, and now my process health is very good. But then actually it doesn't help your process is very good, but your results are not very good. So you must always look at both of these. So with results, then I mean the actual effectiveness of those controls. So actually to explain this detective controls to you a bit better, I've asked Jim to show you just a quick video. And this is now more again in the petrochemical environment. So I just want to have,
there's core driving up on the left. Not good.
No, so yeah, here's now from another angle that you can see the same incident.
See a bird flying there. Always watch the birds for earthquakes, right?
Yeah. So I think, Jim, for me, what's very important, why I usually show this video when we have a BOWTIE class or training, is usually when you do BOWTIE, there's always multiple events. It's not always one single event. So if you would read the newspaper, then the only event you would read about, it would say there was a plant explosion. But actually before that plant explosion, a lot of things happened. So actually, if you go back, I mean, the first thing you would have had, there must have been some sort of loss of containment of that gas. And then after that loss of containment, you had a situation where, say, there's a gas release and then a vapor clouds form. So you can actually see it in the video. And then after the vapor cloud forms, I mean, there must first be a ignition source before you get the explosion and then the fire. So if I had to put in a detective control, I mean, usually people will now say, okay, but you must have very good emergency response and you must have very good, say, something that can suppress the fire, but that's way too far down the chain of events. So actually, where you wanted to detect the problem and your control that should have been in place was the integrity of your structures. So either the pipeline or the tanks in this case, and that's really where you also want to start. And I think that's an important principle also to teach people is actually, I mean, if the explosion already happened, now I'm in the corrective control space. So to start, you must start in this preventive control and then actually use those called detection devices to stop that. So I think that's just the principle I wanted to illustrate here.
Yeah, and I think it's you hear about changing in staff, changing in conditions at plants, maintenance, high turnover rate, all these types of things are kind of leading indicators
Yes.
to these type of events. Living in Houston at the time, we had lots of refineries, and you could almost see, the companies that were not able to keep up, they having their struggles either financially or with their workers. It was not that uncommon that during that time or after that time that you have an incident of some sort. So, really building robust controls around a safe work environment.
Yes,
and
I agree.
Suppression is so critical.
Agreed. And I think that's why people that will know process safety, I mean, that's why there's multiple elements that you actually go and look at. And like you now mentioned, it's also things like the culture of the organization, etc. So it's not always the hard controls that you go and put in place, because you can put those controls in place, and that's what the BOWTIE does. But actually the things like the leadership, the culture, all those things actually play a huge role for your risk management to work. So usually when we start, that's actually where you will start, is actually putting the right culture and ownership for these things in place.
Great. And then I'm trying to catch up here. And I'll just take it from here. Next slide is about risk event detection and response. And this is really classical overview on a risk event, time to recovery, as we call it, and what the value of the organization is. So you're trying to put some output, gas in this case, they're trying to, as a refinery. And so, they're trying to, protect that value of being able to produce that product. And so you have some value that these set of conditions are coming. There's really three scenarios that we'll look at. The first scenario is late detection of the risk event over a delayed response. So on the y-axis, we have elapsed time, is when do you detect it and when do you respond? So the longer you wait to detect a risk event and the more delayed it is, the bigger impact it will. So you will not recover the value of that deliverable or that gas. Now, with that explosion, they're probably down for, who knows, 3-6 months due to that explosion. Some could be a couple of weeks, could be a month, could be a year that you're down because of one of these late detections, because your detection in your recovery was not fast enough. The second scenario is where you have more of a delayed response to that risk event, and you might be able to recover a little bit more of that value, let's say the second value. The third way of looking at it is if you have early detection of that risk event and it's affecting not just you, but it also affects your competitors in your space, and you look at it from that perspective. If you're able to respond faster, really, really fast, you may be able to recover from that risk event, like a port blockage or external risk events, especially. But if everybody's encountering the same types of things, your ability to respond faster than your nearest competitor will actually give you a competitive edge. And that's really the key about risk management, and that's how you're able to generate more money. And I can just say for myself, back in the years at GE, we did this and we were able to recover faster than our competitors, and we gained significant market share because we had those programs in place. And so with that, we looked at, three different things: reduce time and duration of the event, reduce the severity and the slope of the event going down, that downslope, and accelerate that time to recovery. And I think we have a question in the chat here.
Yes, I see. yeah, the question is, do we use failure mode and effects analysis? Yeah, you can. So what you usually will do is you can, if you have like a technical like BOWTIE that you are doing, so that's equipment related, then you can start using all the information that's available. So typically if MIA or you typically, if the companies that issue-based risk assessments on a specific issue or project, so usually you will start, I'm not sure, people have different names for it, but in South Africa, we call it like a baseline risk assessment. So that's where you will start, and then you go down to the issue base, and then there's different risk assessment tools or techniques that you can use. But yeah, that's a good question. So as an input to the BOWTIE, you can then use that, but the BOWTIE don't go, currently we set it up, it's a visualization tool, so it's not really a quantification tool in the sense that you will quantify your probability and all those things to the nth degree. So it's more that you, as I answered earlier, that you start seeing a visual picture of the different controls. So that's how we use it.
Thanks, Cor. And that leads us to this survey question. How often should you review your risks? What's your opinion? Should you review your risks on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, yearly, weekly, some other time frame? So Monica and Cor, what are you seeing as the normal time frame that most of your customers are reviewing their risks?
Yeah, I usually see that people will drop a risk register and then do it yearly. So they'll go through a yearly cycle. Yeah, but the problem is, and I think we discussed it, Jim, then it's not a live document. So usually my experience is it will be a once-off exercise, and then people will only revisit that risk register if something went wrong, and then they actually just go and check that I have that risk on my risk register, that just to cover themselves from a legal or governance perspective. But it's not a living document. So I think the intent of this, if you start doing control management, is then that becomes a lot more active way of managing your risk, because, and we'll talk a bit about that later. I mean, if you start verifying your controls, then it's a live thing. I mean, then I start having visibility if my controls are working or not. But then it's more like then it should become a real-time dashboard. So, I mean, I like the monthly, but actually in operational sense, some of those controls, depending on that criticality, some of them can actually move up, say.
Yes. Yeah, so you have risk at the tactical, in the operational level, not usually strategic level, but at that mid-level or the operational day-to-day. So that some day-to-days are weekly, and you're trying to route those out as they occur. So when you're building it out, for us, it was at a weekly basis, a hard look on a quarterly basis, and then a monthly monitor in areas and updates as new risks come about. That's kind of how we did it back in the day. So I think the key here is that you have a methodology, right?
Agreed. Yeah, and I think and that it's actually, but I think the more embedded it is in your way of doing business, that it's not a separate item. So then if it's monthly or quarterly, it doesn't matter. So it's part of your, say, formal quarterly review of your business then, but it's not, when I mean separate, I don't mean separate that, I mean, you've now package it separately, but I mean, if it's ingrained in your way of doing business, that's actually what you want.
Yeah, embedding it into your monthly meetings, your quarterly meetings.
That's the best one.
That's the key.
And I think it must be visual as well. You must be able to track and see it as you go along, even in the month and in the quarter as you work.
Excellent.
This is really just a summary. So I think what's important is actually the BOWTIE tool just visualizes all of these things. So it helps you to look at, I mean, really a first step is that I actually choose all the correct controls. And then actually to talk the people through the logic to go, I mean, and so what we will usually do is we will have the discussion and say, okay, say for instance, this is the control I've chosen, but I mean, so what type of control is it? And then you will go through that act object system type of questions, and you'll go through the hierarchy of controls. And then the other thing that's not shown here, then you will start adding things like escalation factors to your control. So I think that's what you'll do there. But I think to make it practical, and that's our next section, Jim, I think for me, what's very important, I mean, if we've now done all of this, so what? So what we've done is to say, okay, but to make it practical, there's a few questions that you can go and ask yourself. And I try to simplify it now. And I think even if the people forget everything else what we talked about today and they just take this slide, I think this gives you a very good, nice summary if you do critical control management. So if you've gone through the process, then the first question you'll ask yourself is, did I choose the correct control? So typically, we call it design effectiveness, but it's really, I mean, of all the available controls, I mean, is it the correct control? And usually why we call it design, it's when you say, for instance, build a new plant, that's the right place to start. If you start adding things later, then it's a lot more difficult. And then the second thing you must ask yourself is that control working as intended? So, and that's about the operating effectiveness, because often we'll go to people and they'll say, yes, we've got all these controls, but if you say start talking to the people, then the controls are not working. And so it's always those two components. And then if they say, okay, yes, but it's working, then you must ask them, but how do you know? Okay, so how do you actually go and check that these controls are working? So if it's an engineering control, you can put some sort of engineering log or whatever on that. But if it's say acts that people are doing, then you need to start doing task observations and things like that. But that portion we actually call control verification. So actually, how do you verify that that control is doing what it's supposed to do? And then coming back to our earlier discussion, if I know these things, have I actually put a system in place to know how should I respond and when must I respond? So is that response time optimized and is it adequate? And usually you'll have a process where you can escalate if something happens. So, I mean, if it's say a minor incident, just your line manager must know, but then if it's more serious, it must go up. So I think that's also part of this discussion. And then the last thing is the whole thing about detection. Have I built enough detection into my system that I actually know when things starts going wrong? And that will actually speak a bit to that verification portion. But I think these are really the key to this methodology, is that you actually go on a practical level, go and ask yourself these questions. Not sure if you want to add anything on this.
No, I think that's really good description, Cor. Okay. So I think we'll just move on to an example of a flood. We have this problem in the US sometimes where we have floods of basements or even floodings at first floor. And, you know, do you have a way to detect it for flooding? So these are things that we want to, there are leak detectors for if it's a plumbing leak. Very often your toilet or your plumbing will leak. A lot of folks go on vacation and they find their house flooded. Even when I was in Texas, this happened quite often. They never turned off the main water valve and they found it had a leaky toilet and it overflowed, or a leaky water line somewhere in their house and their whole house was flooded. So, or it could be a storm. These look like more storm types of things, but even any of these could just be a leaky pipe. That not necessarily a storm, but there are leak detectors out there that will shut off the main valve of your house. You have to put that valve in, but there are ways to control these types of events. And, you know, when you look at, from a tip perspective, you can look at it and say, you know, these things can be overwhelming. Use the 80-20 principle. I think we all know it. 20% of the cause 80% of the effect, and look at it from that perspective. Pretty basic principle, but just don't forget about these simple types of approaches. With that,
I think,
go ahead.
sorry, Jim. I think what's important here, I mean, what we've seen is, I mean, if you start building all these controls, it becomes so overwhelming that people then start monitoring nothing.
Yeah.
So one of the things that, even like you do your top 20 risks, you can also do your top 50 controls. Again, depending on the type of business, I mean, and the maturity of your business. But I think this is a very important thing, that if you are the manager of a business and I phone you in the middle of the night, you will be able to tell me, I mean, what are the things that needs to be in place? And that's typical your controls. And that's a practical way of doing that, or what are the things that will stop your business.
Excellent. So, Monica?
Yeah, so all of this can be very overwhelming, and another tip is to, if you start with your risk process and you start identifying your risks and putting it on a prevalence map, to do it department by department or piece by piece, and then consolidate your risk at the end to understand your organization or your overall risk from a top strategy perspective. But start small and start by only understanding the risk in your department or per department. We also have a third tip for to help you with this, and this is to use the tools out there. So each of these process steps do have tools available, but if we focus on the BOWTIE, we have BOWTIE, it's a digital tool, and it will help you to facilitate the process of going through your unwanted event and understanding the mitigating and the corrective and preventive controls. And it will also visualize it for your team to work through it. So use the tools out there to help you with this process, and capture it and have it in a cloud or online somewhere where people can revisit it.
Cora?
Yes, so perhaps just this is the last step I think that we have, and what's important, I mean, in the end, people will always ask you, but why do you need to do all of these things? And part of this process is that you actually need to go and give assurance to your board. So for instance, if you're a large company, then if I'm a manager, how do I know that I'm managing all these risks and everything is in place? So typical, we call this the layers of defense, but there's different models. Some people have 5 levels and others 7 levels. But if we boil it down, it's really 3 levels. So, but you can actually start before that. So the control verification will always start with the person doing the job. So that person doing the job will check it. Then his manager or supervisor, the line management, they will then actually go and over-inspect, and they will check, I mean, are those controls working as intended? And then in your business, you always have second parties. So that's your financial department or your quality department that will actually, from a second party perspective, actually go and look if your controls are working. And then the third party is usually your external audits that you will arrange. So then you get, for instance, an external auditor to sign off on your financial statements. And all of those things together, and it must actually be integrated, must actually then give you assurance that those controls are working. And I think this is an important link, and that's why that umbrella that Monica showed in the different departments are important, because these risks are not always in one place in your business. They are all over the business. And what your process must do is it must make sure that you cover all of those risks. And then you must actually be able to give your board assurance that you are managing that. Yeah, so I think that is a nice model, yeah, just to show that.
So I think we're going to move on in the interest of time to the case study.
Yes. So what we did here was just to show a few examples, Jim, of critical control failures and actually the impact it had on big organizations. So the first example we used then is here, Citigroup, and what's very interesting here, this happened in 2020 in August, is where they had to pay a fine that the regulatory bodies imposed on them. And it's very interesting if you read the articles, is they made a payment of $900 million to the wrong people. And if you think about it, I mean, it's nearly unthinkable that you think that amount of money could be paid incorrectly, and then the people that received the money didn't want to pay it back. And if you then think about it, there's actually three things that I said, is that the controls that they had in place, it were not adequate for the size, complexity, and risk profile of that business. And when I read that, I thought that's really a very good summary, that if you put these controls in place, you must actually understand the size and the complexity of the business, and also what type of business you are in. So for instance, for a bank, those controls will look different. And so for instance, the next examples you'll see, for instance, an operational platform or a logistics company. So I think part of this journey is actually that you understand your own business and your own culture, and then actually apply the controls appropriately. Yeah, this is just an example.
Yeah.
Okay. So another two examples of this is the Horizon Deep spill that happened a few years ago, and this is a typical example of the operation or production safety incident. And yeah, this is also a good example of multiple controls that failed. There were mechanical failures, where the valves didn't work and the blowout preventer didn't work, and there were faulty wiring and a dead battery, and all of these weren't tested properly to see if they are working. So yeah, this is a good example of the hole in the cheese, almost in the Swiss cheese model, aligning and ending in disaster. In South Africa, we have a IT or data example where one of our banking providers, Standard Bank, they had an outage that left people stranded, basically, because they couldn't pay for anything. People were filling tanks of petrol and then couldn't pay for it because no ATMs were working. And the consequence of that was that they lost clients. There were reputational risk, so the credibility declined, and the person responsible for this actually lost his job. So yeah.
Great. And another example that we have is the Boeing 737 MAX failure, that a failure of management, not just technology. They say it was a technical system failure was the proximate cause of the disasters, which cost the company billions, but more importantly, 346 passengers and crew tragically lost their lives due to this. And when you look at the root cause, you could say sourcing, development, but there was also a change in leadership in the way that they were running the company, with the new CEO, Dennis Molenberg, that because of their push to make money for the shareholder, they changed things. They really shortcutted some of their processes that would have been caught in the previous way that they ran their company in sourcing and development. And so, eventually that CEO left the company, and now they have a new CEO. So a lot of this is tops down, and it's the culture of the company on what's important. So it does require senior leadership to really view that risk is something that we need to take on proactively. and it's not something to avoid. With that, there's many layers of defense for the unknown risk on how to manage unknown risks. This is a great model by McKinsey. And it's, we talk about leadership, culture, supply chain, risk manager and supply chain risk and resilience to manage these risks, to prevent, irrecoverable asset damage, which we've talked about, catastrophic personal injury or loss of life, significant environmental or local injury. And they have layers here that they have identified. Of course, you start with design quality, health, the equipment health, your maintenance, the oversight assurance methods, those processes, decision-making, worker operator fundamentals, what are they doing on the floor to see things, and of course, the overall emergency preparedness. So very aligned to what we've been discussing. So McKinsey did a very nice job at this. And with that, we go right into the value prop.
Yeah, I think what's important here, Jim, what we've learned today is, that risk events will happen. The examples that we just showed, and some of that is some of the best companies in the world and the largest companies. I think the larger your company is, the more the visibility of your risk become important. So I think that the two lessons for me is, the one is, and that's what that 89% stands for. It says 89% of companies experience a supply risk event in the past 5 years. So for me, that's a given. You will experience it. And the 2 times it just says, you will be 2 times, what's the word, if more effective if you have the correct risk tactics in place. So I think if you use the correct technology and you have the correct response, and you really think about these risks, then you will definitely be able to bounce back better. And I think that's really the big thing. So I think the importance for me is really this mindset that we are advocating. It's more a way of thinking than it's just the technology. Although we have developed a small tool, it's really, I think for me, if you start thinking in this proactive mindset and you are more responsive, then you will definitely be more successful.
We have one more example for you from our friends at McKinsey, and they did a survey on supply chain vulnerabilities, and this was done in May of 2022. And their question is, which of the following conditions makes your company most vulnerable to value chain or supply chain disruptions or any cause, including COVID-19? And they had 4 different sectors: automobiles, chemicals, consumers, and pharmaceuticals. And it's up to 50 is a high. And the number one thing that came out was demand variability. And we've seen it, that the demand is changing. And then, of course, that affects the sourcing, and then long lead times. You can see that in the beginning, chemicals more at risk and on demand variability, pharma on the sole sourcing, long input lead times, chemicals again, and then it starts bunching up as we go down. But the main thing that we see here is that from an operating model perspective is that, if you look at it from plan, source, make, deliver, return, that most of these are in the plan sourcing area. And that's why when you're looking for a place to start, very often you're looking to, reduce the risk in these areas. If you go back to the SCORE model and you look at the best practices, it's also a very good place to start in building out your resiliency. With that, Monica will close us out. Monica?
Yeah, so we have the BOWTIE tool. It's the software that we developed to help you visualize your BOWTIEs. It's free. There's a basic version that's free, but there is a full function annuality to our BOWTIE course is $200 per annum, and it includes BOWTIE training. So you can start building your own BOWTIEs and take this methodology and the thinking and put it onto a tool that is digital for you. So if you want more information about this, you are welcome to contact us. Our contact details are on the next slide. And you can contact us and we will engage with you, and we'll see how we can assist you with BOWTIE tool.
So I'm really excited about the next webinar where we'll get to see the online tool. We've been leading up to that, and we appreciate your time. Just as I said before, the webinar will be posted on the EIG website. We'll also send you out the slides within a few days here. We welcome questions and comments, as always, direct to Cor and Monica and or myself for any questions you have on this webinar and follow up. With that, closing comments, Monica?
I think this is exciting, and I really hope that understanding your controls and visualizing it and putting it on a tool and revisiting it more often than yearly, having a living tool that can add benefits to your business. I would love to see that, and I would love to see businesses benefiting from that. Yeah.
Cor?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the discussion. Yeah, and thanks again, Jim, for the opportunity that we could share some of our own learnings with everybody. Yeah, and I think every time we ourselves think a bit about the work we've been doing over the years, I think you also get a better picture of things that worked and didn't work. And I think that's why in the end, the tools that you develop must be practical and it must help people. Yeah, so it was really nice to talk about this. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Monica and Cor, for your insights and knowledge sharing in this space. Very important space. And I thank all the participants in the webinar for your questions. Very insightful. You know, we as a recap, I would say, you know, we're a lot of folks may think that we're over the COVID-19 tumultuous VUCA world. We're really hitting the whip of the tail at the end here, and there's going to be a lot of more changes in the next year, and I would expect that more risk events will be continuing to occur, and we need to find a way to thrive and survive in these tumultuous times. And if you do have a proactive program with BOWTIE online, it's visible to the company, it's certainly going to provide you a very easy way to have those conversations in your quarterly or monthly meetings to help you in your company survive and thrive in these coming years. So thanks for everyone for joining us. And with that, have a great day and evening.